and welcome to Uncle Shooter's Workshop, where this is an episode called Construction Junction, where we build something. Your host is John Schuster. Today's project is a Christmas project. Happens to be a standard kit called the three-dimensional Christmas tree. There's a bunch of parts in here, and the kit comes from a company called Velleman, V-E-L-L-E-M-A-N. And we've built a number of these kits in the past. We found out that they're very well put together. The only issue we have with them is the documentation on how to build them sometimes is a little lacking. To get started, we'll take all the parts inside of this case and sort them using this muffin tin over here. We found out by doing this it makes it a little easier for us to be able to actually go ahead and build the unit. We'll also be constructing the unit using our new, recently purchased Weller soldering iron system. Very nice system where you can dial up the temperature. It's much preferred over the previous soldering iron system that we had, which bit the dust recently. We'll get started. Thank you. Here's the unit after it's been unpacked. You can see the two circuit boards. The slots on them allow them to be inserted into one another, giving the Christmas tree a three-dimensional look. And here's the documentation. It is a single page of documentation with how to assemble the unit. And here is the muffin tray with our parts, our red and our green and our yellow LEDs. Some capacitors, a couple of wire shunts, some resistors, a handful of transistors, and a couple of spring connectors here that are used for resting the unit on top of a battery. Let's get constructing. One of the first components inside of a kit is the resistors. Resistors look like this, and we're going to zoom in on these resistors, and you can see the color-coded bands that are on there, and a brown, black, and red band, as you can see here, is a 1K resistor. As the resistors are inserted through the board in their proper place, we bend the leads off to the side a little bit and away from other joints or other soldering positions on the board in order for us to solder them. And to give us a hand in soldering, we're going to be using the helping hand. This device has a handful of alligator clips on it, a heavy base, and a magnifying glass that allows us to easier view the soldering joints as we do them. A couple of tips when soldering. You should make certain that the tip on your soldering iron is clean. And the way I do this is by using a wallboard sponge, which has sandpaper on one side and a sponge on the other side. But I do want to point out that the Weller soldering unit does have a cleaning area here, a little wet sponge. Put some water on it, and it's the place where you insert the soldering iron when you're not actually soldering. One last item we want to focus on is make certain that you use rosin core solder. Do not use acid core solder. Sometimes it's more readily available. Plumbers use that for plumbing. That'll ruin a project very quickly. You want to make certain that you use rosin core solder. Here's another one of the components that we'll be installing. It's called a capacitor. And some capacitors actually have polarity on them. As you can see on this capacitor, it has a minus sign right there. And the other terminal on the other side is the positive. And they also make the minus sign with the shorter lead, as you can see here. When you're installing these in the circuit board, please make certain that you observe the polarity to avoid the capacitor from not working properly. One of the instructions indicates that we're to mount the capacitors laying flat down. which in this case we take the capacitor and we insert it in the hole and then bend it so that it lays down flat on the board instead of stand straight up. The next component that we're going to be installing is called a transistor. These particular transistors have 3 leads on them, as typically most do. Transistors are either NPN or PNP, and they should be soldered into the board carefully to make certain that the 3 connectors are aligned correctly. One of the last components, and one of the most plentiful components in this project, are the little LEDs that blink on the edges of the tree. An LED typically has 2 leads on it. One lead is shorter than the other one, as you can see here. The shorter lead is called the cathode. And the polarity is very important when you're installing these on the board. And in this particular case, the cathode part of the LED mounting is, as you can see here where it says LD8, is the dark area. That's where the cathode or the shorter lead of the LED goes. And when these are soldered on the board, they have to be soldered in the board and bent over so that they blink on the little semicircular notch that you see there. The next component to add are these 2 little battery spring terminals, which get soldered onto the board where you see the big negative and positive there. The springs actually have to be routed through both of the holes and then soldered in place. And what happens is when the tree's completed, these 2 springs will rest on top of a 9-volt battery to power it. These are the final 2 circuit boards before we assemble them into their tree. You take a look at the components with the LEDs mounted on the edge, bent over sideways. Same thing with the other board. And in this particular board, you can see the 2 little springs there that were soldered in place that will rest on top of the 9-volt battery. And you can see the slot part right here will go into this slot part right here to assemble the tree. And this is what the tree looks like when the 2 units are slipped onto one another. And we will use these 2 pieces of straight wire to connect the 2 parts of the trees together and also strengthen them. And that's basically the last component before we plop on the battery and see how our project has gone. And here's the final product, the Christmas tree, 3-dimensional, blinking away, sitting on top of a regular 9-volt battery. And that's the end of this particular project from Uncle Shooter's workshop. Thank you very much, and be sure to visit us at www.uncleshooter.com. Thank you.